All right. Well, uh, we'll start with a teaching by another wisdom teaching from the Gospel of Thomas. This is a real short one, uh, and it'll get us into our into the center of what we're doing today. Yeshua says, and this is the 10th teaching, or logion, they're called, Greek term for just saying. This is the 10th saying in 114. Yeshua says, "See, I have sown fire into the cosmos, and I shall tend it carefully until it blazes." This is what the Gospel of Thomas is like, these short little things that sort of you can chew on for a while. And again, Yeshua says, "See, I have sown fire into the cosmos, and I shall tend it carefully until it blazes." There's nothing like these kinds of statements in the canonical Gospels. Jesus is here he's like a Zen master. He was giving koans or little mystery images and puzzles to actually, it frustrates the left brain because he's going right for the heart. Again, "See, I've sown fire into the cosmos, and I shall tend it carefully until it blazes." While we're in the interval, and after I gave Ron and Scott the oatmeal, I was back there building a fire. So when the boss wakes up, she'll be warm. And you don't just you don't just like throw a bunch of stuff in a wood stove. Thank you, Ben Franklin, for teaching us how to keep fire in a house without burning the house down. Fire is a very interesting image, Jesus, because he says he's going to sow. This is right after actually the previous saying, where it's the first of the sayings. Number 9 is the first one that ever appears even in the other. It's the parable of the sower that you might know, that the sower's throwing seeds everywhere, and lands on the rocks and doesn't grow, and gets choked by the thorns. And then finally the seed that lands on the good soil. Back in those days, dry broadcasting farming, which is what they did, they didn't have irrigation, so they're scattering the seeds. If you could get a 7-fold increase, then you could have enough to live on, and then have some seed to throw again next year. Pretty much 7-fold increase. Well, he said, well, when it really lands on the good seed, on the good ground, the good soil, he says you could have 60, you could have 120. Well, which would be like our idea of maybe hitting the lottery. And people were saying, that's amazing. How could that be? What is that soil like? Well, he's talking about, which Merton picks up in the Seeds of Contemplation, that there's constantly seeds of wisdom and compassion being sown in the universe. And the question is, what kind of soil are we? What kind of soil is our heart? So, and then the next one, he says, I'm going to come and sow fire into the cosmos, and I'm going to tend it carefully until it blazes. Well, I started the fire with some newspaper and some little tinder, and then I gradually built it up. And that was blazing. And then Pam takes over from there. She'll just keep feeding it. Well, that's sort of the idea of spiritual reading, or in this case, a spiritual talk. Hopefully there was a few sparks that happened in the sitting, and now we sort of tend this fire. We'll feed it a little bit. When Jesus is talking about sowing fire, fire is something we don't really know the way they knew it then. Fire was there for survival. Fire could be, we know fire, especially if you live in California, fire is something that, the fire season, we fear it. It does have such power, it could just wipe things out. So this idea of carefully tending it is important. But the fire that Jesus is talking about, and the alchemists knew this, and ancient cultures knew this, contemplative cultures, indigenous cultures knew this, that fire was representing two things in a human being symbolically. It was representing transformation. The alchemists who were trying to transform lead into gold, they put it in what was called a crucible, which would be a holder that could withstand terrific temperatures. That's what a crucible really means. It's a bowl that can hold terrific temperatures, a lot of heat. And for me, that's one reason that you have to have a spiritual practice, because all of a sudden the heat gets turned up on your life. And can you hold it? Can you be transformed by it? If you don't have some kind of basic spiritual practice, when the heat gets turned up, it's not transforming, and it won't transform you. You'll run away from it. It's like, it makes sense. Move away from the hot stove kind of thing. But so it's transformative, and then it's also illuminative. Fire will give you light. Fire will give you light. And so we're talking about, Jesus is talking about that when he says, I'm sowing it into the cosmos. That word, again, the Gospel of Thomas was written in Coptic, language in Egypt by monks. And so when you translate it all into English, the cosmos there, it would have meant the culture. It didn't really mean, the entire universe, which the astrophysicists talked. It talks really about the prevalent culture. And so he's going to sow fire into, for him, it was the Roman Empire. For Yeshua, it was the Roman Empire and the Jewish temple state. He was going to transform it and illuminate people. And that's what a good talk should do. Hopefully this talk will do something like that. Okay. If you go out to the monastery here on the night before Easter for the Easter Vigil Mass, they start with a fire. Everybody gathers around outside the monastery. They build a kind of thing with cedar, and then it starts with a monk with a stone on flint, and just sparks coming out. And then he's put like moss and stuff in there. It's sort of cool to see. And all of a sudden a spark catches, and then the thing goes up. And then they light the Paschal candle, this big candle. The abbot takes a little thing, gets the fire, and lights the Paschal candle. And then everybody lights their own candles that they're doing. And then we all process into the dark church with the light. It's quite moving. Actually, sometimes when I go out there, I'll just hang around the fire because it's amazing to watch it. It's sort of mesmerizing. Yeah. So we got a little kind of flint and stone thing here, because I'm going to use a statement by Merton that comes from Words in Solitude or something like that. But the statement is really like flint that you can get some sparks from. And he says point blank one time, this is a great sentence by Merton that's going to take us somewhere, hopefully. And he said, he's speaking to the reader, and he says, you are shaped by the end you live for. This is a classic one, kind of Merton declarative sentence that's just is like can spark off something. So get it down if you got writing something. And this is the kind of thing you should put on a plaque somewhere. You are shaped by the end you live for. And then that brings up the question. And that's sort of the way, you're striking, that's the striking flint on stone. So if Merton's learned something in his life, he says, you're shaped by the end you live for. And so then the question, this is the first great question that you could write down, is, what am I living for? 5-word question. It's a dangerous question, it'll trouble you at a certain stage of your life. I've been living with this question for a while. I intend to be living with this question all the way. What am I living for? Now, you won't hear this question on CNN. You won't hear this question on MSNBC or Fox. You won't hear this question in our culture because we've already been taught by our culture what we're living for. Say, we've been taught, we've already been taught, so we don't even ask this question. We've all been sort of indoctrinated. So what have we been taught? Well, at least 5 things. We're given 5 options. And that the teaching is not like that you got in school. It's like we're fish in the water of this culture, modern American consumer culture. So it's already taught us what we're living for. So let's review it. We really have to see the water we're swimming in before we can actually go further with that question. So these are what I think the 5 main things that our culture's taught us, almost subliminally, almost like the way the ads get to us. The first one, I call it the 4 Ps. What am I living for? Power, profit, possessions, or prestige. Or if you could get them, all 4 of them. The 4 Ps sort of tell you about why things are the way they are in the world, because people are living. If you're living to get power, and then let's make money, profit, possessions, prestige. Those are the 4 Ps, and a lot of people are thinking, well, that's what we're supposed to be living for. Okay, and I saw somebody wearing a T-shirt one time is whoever dies with the most toys wins. Well, yeah, that is true in terms of what our culture says. Okay. So the 4 Ps. Now, the second thing would I call the AAA, just like your insurance company, your car thing, AAA, the 3 A's. These overlap, of course, but we've been given several teachings. The 3 A's are what you live for is attractiveness, keeping, being fit. And as you get older, I got age spots on both sides, got to get rid of those. Attractiveness, achievement is what you're living for. You're living to achieve something, get in the Guinness Book of World Records, or, athletes are really into this, breaking the records, and then somebody will break yours. And then affluence. So those 3 things, really, if you want to know what gets you on TV, it's one of those, or one of the 4 Ps. You're really attractive, Housewives of Atlanta, or all these people. They're just these really attractive people that get on. Or you've achieved something, or you're rich as hell. The only reason some people are on TV is because they got a lot of money. So so 4 Ps, 3 A's. What else might you be living for in our culture? Comfort. Comfort. That's what people think. Well, the more of these, the more profit, the more power, whatever. Then I can live in comfort. I love. I watch a lot of PBS. And, they have the Viking ads on there for Viking river cruises, exploring the world in comfort. Okay, so it's not bad to be comfortable. But if that's the goal, well, you wouldn't be here. You want to really listen to the gospel or the Buddhist sutras, because those will make you uncomfortable, just like this question, what am I living for? Well, I'm just living. Yeah, that's a problem. So maybe you want to be comfort. We want to remain in the comfort zone at all times. You'll leave this talk now if you do, because we're not going there. The 4th thing, so the 4 Ps, 3 A's, just exploring the world in comfort with a British accent. The 4th thing was happiness. Well, okay, maybe I just want to be happy. Well, I like being happy as much as anybody, but it comes and goes. It comes and goes, doesn't it? Depending on circumstances. I got to let some people in here. Yeah. Okay. It depends on circumstances. And actually, I read a psychological study by some psych guys who said that happiness lasts a maximum 3 days. Think about it. Think about, your Christmas time presents and whatnot. Kids love it at first, but then in a couple of days, you're playing with it anymore. The Zen guys go further than that. The Zen guys say happiness lasts as long as a dewdrop on a blade of grass at dawn. Nothing wrong with it, but it comes and goes. You see, and if your idea is you're really going, I'm living to be happy, you're not going to be very happy, because most of the time you're not going to be there, and you're going to be trying to be happy. So happiness, I'm not putting it down. I love it when everything breaks and the program works, but it doesn't often work. It'll break down as much as it works. Yeah. So the fifth one here would be, if none of those things, longevity. Just had a thing, a woman celebrated her 100th birthday in Nelson County, and it was in the Kentucky Standard. Longevity. Just Stephen Colbert has a little segment he says, calls it cheating death with Dr. Stephen Colbert. So we can keep death at bay, and you've really succeeded if you live to be 100. Well, I'm not sure. The way I feel at 73, I'm not sure longevity is really the best thing. But anyway, because really underneath that is the idea, even though we got churches on every street corner, that when you die, game over, lights out, say. And so maybe longevity, milk it for as much. You grab for all the gusto you can while you're here. That really, it talks about the fact that none of this means anything. Meaning sort of went out the window, combination, but definitely with World War I and World War II in Europe, much sooner than it did here, when there's such destruction that's just seemed to be meaningless slaughter of millions of people. World War I, World War II, atomic bomb. Actually, just there's no meaning, there's no God, those kinds of things. There's no plan. So just grab for all the gusto you can. Be as comfortable and have as many wild experiences as you can, because when you die, lights out. Well, that doesn't, you get more and more fearful. It really doesn't, it doesn't work so well. So we got to see really what's in the way before we can really even consider that question. That's why nobody asked that question. What are you living for? That's an intentional question. And that's a question of the soul. See, that's a soul question, not an ego question. And people will argue about whether you have a soul or not. Well, because none of those actually work. How happy are those people? How happy are the people who have the 4 Ps? It's legendary. They're not, or anything else. If you want to be happy, most of the time you won't feel good, because happiness comes and goes. Longevity, who can control that? Who can control that? Some of the great, Merton died at 52, wasn't even 53. Great tragedy. Well, on one level it is, but on another level, the fact that the guy, and a lot of people who die young have actually made that journey. And the fact that it's not the only rodeo, which is what almost every contemplative tradition says, not the only rodeo. So this question, what am I living for? That's a question that is directional. You see, it's intentional and it's directional, because it says there's something to live for. One of my favorite poets, William Stafford, he's onto this. And in one of his great poems, which is called a Ritual to be Read to Each Other, the first stanza, it's just something to listen to, and then eventually put in your heart. He said, if you don't know who I am, and I don't know who you are, A pattern others made may prevail in this world, and following the wrong God home, we may both miss our star. If you don't know who I am, and I don't know who you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in this world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. Now there's an old teaching, that says pre-electricity, even fire maybe, human beings looked at the sky at night. That was the Late Show without Stephen Colbert. That was the Late Show. They looked at all those points of light in the sky, and somebody, it just came out that there's a star for you, and you had to travel to it. There's a destiny. The word destiny, destino, in Italian, it comes from the word for star. In other words, we've got somewhere to go. This isn't just random. That's a very old teaching, and Stafford's picking it up. And it has a lot to do with communication. He said, and it's a lot about being able to tell people who you are and finding out who you are. If you don't know who I am and I don't know who you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in this world. We just talked about that pattern in our culture. A pattern that others make may prevail in this world, and following the wrong God home, we may both miss our star. That's just the first stanza of a ritual to be read to each other. But it's saying, you can waste your life. You can miss your star, your destiny. The Star of Bethlehem led the wise men. They followed the star, you see. So, and so you get a guy like Merton, who's he spent the first 27 years of his life following a lot of sort of just going with the wind. Nothing really came of it. And then he got intentional. He just decided he followed something, and nobody expected it. He entered, medieval monastery. And so it got interesting. And what Merton wrote about was, he said, the whole thing is to find out what your true self is. There's a false self, which is that pattern that can get in the way. And the false self it's not identical with the ego. A lot of people who get into spirituality, even like Merton, they think I get rid of my ego. Then what's left is my true self. Well, that's not true. That's not Merton's thought at all. He says there is a true self, but you have to grow it. Okay, it's a growing thing, because the soul is not a thing. You grow. The soul is about growth. See, and so you grow your true self, and what helps you grow the true self is some kind of practice. He went into a medieval monastery. That's really not a real good option for most people, but it worked for Merton. I met monks it didn't work for, who were there 50 or 60 years, and it really wasn't what they needed, but it worked for Merton. You have, in 52 years, over 60 books written, books that any of us could read and do read. Unbelievable amount of growth that happened in that 27 years in a medieval monastery. But again, we'll all find our own way, but the point is about growing into your true self. And that connects with this thing. Well, what am I living for? Well, it would be nice to live for, to become who you are really meant to be. That's what Merton was talking about. And it's never too late to start that, because this isn't the only rodeo. The road goes on forever, as Tolkien says. And so, you can start at any time. Just say, well, who am I really? So here's one poem. I wrote this poem during the week because I was thinking about this. Actually, I've been working on this talk for a while, longer than a week. But this is just called Growing into Your True Self. let's imagine that just for a few seconds that you're going to say, all right, yeah, that sounds good. Find out who I really am and find out what my gifts are. Find out what I should be doing on this planet, for the time I have left. So here's the poem. He says, when you hear a guy like Merton talking about the journey of the true self, it sounds so inviting. Hell yeah, where can I sign up? But at some point along the path, you realize that you should have actually read the fine print before you hit the agree button. We all do that on these websites, who reads the fine print? You just agree so you can get onto it. And here's the fine print of this trip, this journey to find your true self. You don't just find your true self, like you find your car keys or even a precious gem, because the true self is not a thing that could be lost. It's something that grows. And it's an endless process. Birthing and growing, dying, birthing again, growing. It's an endless process that over and over requires you to face pain, uncertainty, hard work, and the need to surrender. Still interested? If so, we'll surely meet up somewhere along the path of love. It's an endless process. If you're really signing on for this, if you really in some form or another say, yeah, before I die, I want to find out who I am. That was, why Thoreau went out to Walden. That's his word. He said, before I die, I want to really find out who I am. That's worthy. And so he went out, got away from everything, did his own monk thing, built his own cabin and all that. But he wanted to find out before he died who he really was. That's what Burton's talking about. And it's an endless process of birth, death, growth that over and over requires you to face four things: pain, uncertainty, a lot of hard work, and the need to surrender ultimately. The need to surrender to the whole process. If you haven't seen the Netflix documentary called Stutz, where Jonah Hill, I forget his name. Yeah, Jonah Hill. He interviews his therapist, Phil Stutz, that helped him so much. Helped him because he became famous, and that's some of the worst things that can happen to you when you get that prestige thing. You become famous. Merton wrote 15,000 letters, many of them at the Hermitage, and he got questions like from a 14-year-old, what's it like to be famous? And how do you become a success? And he wrote back in the letter, he said, don't. It's the word being famous, monk. It would cause him a lot of problem, But so fame, it doesn't work really. So after Jonah became famous, he got depressed and then almost suicidal. And then he met his therapist who he worked with, and he helped him out. And he talks about these three basic things that all human beings have to deal with. It's just part of the package deal when you hit the agree button to be a human being, which we don't. Here we come out of the chutes, here we are. But it's pain, uncertainty, and if you want to become who you're meant to be, hard work. And I'd add, because Phil is talking a kind of psychological point, but he leans into the fourth one, which he talks about later as radical acceptance. The traditions call it also surrender. In other words, well, what are you surrendering to? Well, the fact that the path of pain, uncertainty, and work is the only path. You say, okay. It's really worth seeing this. Deb Ackerman, who's here today, she gave a shout out about it a couple of weeks ago, and it's not, it might not be your cup of tea exactly, but I think he's got that right. That if you're going to want to become a total human being, which is also equivalent to the true self, It's also, it's what where our potential is, that you have to go through pain, uncertainty, and it takes a lot of work. You guys showed up today. That took something. That took some work. But then finally, it takes you can become happy in the midst of this if you really just love the whole process. You just say, yeah, amazing, amazing, pain, uncertainty, a lot of things to work on. Well, it's great. I'm giving myself to it. This is the deal. You know, that's surrender. He calls it radical acceptance. He said the only closest you get to happiness is when you just radically accept that this is your life, this is how life is, and I'm going to go with the whole process. Go with the whole process. And this, I call it the path of love. You just love the whole process. What's spinning this wheel that we're on, the wheel of time. You can watch it on Netflix, or you can actually be it. And that you just love this whole process of growing more and more, finding out more and more about yourself, finding more and more, becoming more yourself. Now, the hard work part is what is the second question that we have. So this first question is enough. I've been living with it for a long time, and I'll be living with it as long as it takes. What am I living for? That's a really important question. Again, you don't get that much. You won't see it on CNN. The second question, Merton wrote a novel before he became a Trappist. It got published only after his death. It was called My Argument with the Gestapo. And it was classic Merton. But here's just and he's at one point he was like a reporter trying to cover the war, and the Gestapo and they're questioning him. And these lines here talk about the hard work. He says, if you want to identify me, ask me not where I live or how I comb my hair, but ask me what I'm living for. In detail, ask me what I think is keeping me from living fully for the thing I want to live for. Yeah, that last part is really the next question. After, what am I living for? Then you got to ask, what's standing in the way of what I'm living for? And that is the work, because we've got all this propaganda we've been fed about who we should be and what we should be doing with our life. We've talked about that. But then there's also just these really deep energy patterns that we have. The Enneagram sort of shows you that. When the Enneagram, you find out you're 1 on the Enneagram, or 5 or 6 or whatever, that's not who you are. It's the first layer of that shows you what's in the way of finding out who you are, which is much deeper. But there we have these energy patterns, and when these energy patterns actually take over your life, you can really get lost. And if you really get hooked on one of these energy patterns, that's what addiction is. In the old times, they called them passions or deadly sins. So this is the work between now, if you decide, I want to really become my true self, and that's what I'm living for. Well, the work is, there's all kinds of things that pop up. Okay. So oftentimes, because I talk about Merton so much, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Merton. That's why I came to Kentucky. None of this would be happening, whether you like Merton or not. And some people don't really care for Merton, but it's rare once you start reading them. And I want to read you, when people say, well, where should I start reading Seventh Story Mountain? And I say, no, I wouldn't do that. That Merton would even say, then later in life, he said, no, I wouldn't start there. This would be where I'd start. I don't know if you can see this, if it's but it's called New Seeds of Contemplation. Merton, this came out in 1962, and this is like his 4 years after his street corner epiphany, which was a kind of real turning point for him. He did the hard work of being a monk. He showed up every day, whether he liked it or not, 7 times a day, and chanted the same old psalms over and over, 17 years, and then boom. Real illumination. That's fire. When you show up every day, that's putting yourself in the fire. And then boom, on that street corner, and he saw that everybody, he loved everybody, and they were all connected. It became like a fireball of love at that point. And he lived 10 years later. And this book came out 4 years after that, New Seeds of Contemplation. I just want to read a part because this talks about the work. If you've ever seen the old film, or maybe there's even a new film called The Invisible Man. I remember seeing the black and white one in the 50s about the invisible man. He was invisible. Well, Merton's writing about it. So this is the hard work for all of us. If you want to become who you're meant to be, he says, I use up my life. This is page 35 of New Seeds of Contemplation. If you have it, you can find this quote. He says, I use up my life in the desire for pleasures and the thirst for experiences, for power, honor, knowledge, and love, to clothe this false self and construct its nothingness into something objectively real. So I wind experiences around myself and cover myself with pleasures and glory like bandages in order to make myself perceptible to myself and to the world, as if I were an invisible man that could only become visible when something visible covered my surface. Interesting image of how we wind things, ideas, we wind around because it's because we, then that's what the world sees, and that's who we become. And so on this journey, the hard work is unwinding it. And in the Islamic tradition, they have this meeting between Muhammad and Allah. Allah shows up. This is really a classic, gives you an idea of the work ahead if you're interested. If you want to hit the agree button to this journey, Allah says to Muhammad, he says, Muhammad, between you and me, there are 70,000 veils. But between me and you, there are none. So this is the really real talking to the human being. And he says, Muhammad, between you and me, there are 70,000 veils, but between me and you, there are none. And so that also gives you a really good metaphor of the hard work that, and the surrender to the hard work is dropping the veils, dropping the ideas you have of yourself, dropping the ideas that the world has about you. I'm working on a poem on this. I mean, there's the Josie that people around Bardstown know or think they know. There's the Josie that friends know, different. And there's the Josie that intimate, really friends know. And that, I count you guys on that level. And then there's this guy that I've only glimpsed, and I'm sort of scared to look at it because it's not, I've glimpsed some things about myself that nobody else. And this is stuff I haven't showed to anybody yet, but that's the process. Yeah, and then there's the parts of myself, just the parts of me that nobody's seen, only God, I would say, that are hidden. But that's the journey as you go. And if you surrender to the journey, that's the hard work, to surrender to it and show up every day. You don't have to show up 7 times a day like the monks, but to show up once and do what we did this morning, sit in the silence and just open yourself up. Really, when you sit in meditation or contemplation, you just make yourself ready to receive. It's like you open the door of the heart, and then the rest is none of your business. And then the door shuts and you're thinking about something again. And then you say, oh yeah. And then when you drop the thought, the door opens again. Say, and then that's your business. Get yourself ready, sit down, be quiet, listen, but that's it. You don't have to make anything happen. Whatever you want to call the really ultimate reality, love, God, Allah, the Tao, they throw names at it, but all the traditions are when you just sit and be in receptivity, sit yourself down, get in a quiet place where you can listen deeply, then you'll hear something. These things, and that's when Merton would come out of those things, then he'd write. And a lot of times you're not hearing words; it's just something's happening in there. Thomas Keating calls it, you're going in, you're showing up for your divine therapy, and you show up to have your rendezvous with your divine therapist, the divine therapist. The office is always open. You don't have to wait for a month to get an appointment to have a rendezvous with the sacred. That's what we did this morning. And when this teaching ends, we'll have 15 minutes. And if time to write, reflect, go to the bathroom. But then when we come back at quarter after the hour, it's rendezvous time. See, in the silence. Hopefully there's been something of this talk that has resonated with the heart. I'm throwing words at it, and hopefully some of it got through. And that's important. So you do spiritual reading or you hear talks. That's like throwing wood on the fire. Somebody said, I haven't read anything for a month. I'm just working. I'm just going crazy. And the fire will go out if you don't keep throwing wood on it. And so that's why you got to do some spiritual reading, or listen to somebody talking about the spiritual journey. That's just like tending that fire. You see, as he said, I tend the fire until it blazes, and so you just sort of keep feeding it. It's very hard to keep going on the journey without that. So I hope that the talk maybe was a few bits of kindling, or a log got thrown in your fire, and now you're blazing a little bit. Now you're on fire a little bit about this. Or maybe you're in trouble, maybe you're in wonder. They go together. You got to be willing to risk something on this journey, because it's always, you go into uncertainty, emptiness. If you can keep going, you show up. Eventually it flips and you're on the street corner, and everything is love. Yeah. When that happens, Merton couldn't have predicted it. And as a matter of fact, if you read his journals, which is where it's really interesting, a couple of weeks before that, he was just thinking, like, 17 years in the monastery. He was so sick of the Psalms, but he showed up and he said, I think maybe I placed the bet on the wrong horse here. He felt like life wasn't getting bigger and more expensive. He felt like it was closing in around him, and he was really just at a low point. And then boom. Yeah. Now, it might not happen that grandly. He had a lot of smaller little things, and then afterwards, but he just kept showing up. He had that trust that the powers in the universe were going to come to him, and I hope you have that same trust. That's why I talk. Yeah. So, all right, that's good. I think that's enough of the talk, and we'll take 15 minutes in the silence and do what you need to do, and then we'll be back and then sit in the silence again for another period of time. Okay. I'll see you.